Chapter 9, 1971, the first Kopan meditation course. Bodh Gaya is where the Buddha reached enlightenment, sitting under a Bodhi tree. The enormous Bodhi tree there today is not the original tree under which the Buddha sat, but a direct descendant of that tree. In the 3rd century BCE, the great emperor Ashoka, the first Buddhist ruler of India, sent his daughter to Sri Lanka with a sapling from the original Bodhi tree, where it was planted and still flourishes today. A descendant of the sapling from Sri Lanka was planted in Bodh Gaya sometime around the 7th century and still marks the spot beside the western face of the great Mahabodhi Stupa where the Buddha reached his goal. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's ordination. It was time for His Holiness the Dalai Lama's annual January teachings at Bodh Gaya. Years later, Lama Zopa Rinpoche recounted his visit there that year. I went to Bodh Gaya alone from Kathmandu and took a red thermos to sell in case I needed money. I couldn't find any room to stay in, so I had to stay at the Hotel Ashok, which was the most expensive, so I finished all my money quickly. In the room next door, there were some Dutch people whom I asked for a loan. They just gave me some money, and that helped until I found a room at the tourist bungalow. Soon after that, I got a room at the monastery, which I shared with a Mongolian monk, who was an abbot. I sold him the red thermos, but he had a watch for sale, so I bought that and still had a little money left. Later, when Lama Yeshe came, he said I'd paid too much for the watch, so we went to see the Mongolian monk and asked for some of the money back, which we eventually got. I took Gelong ordination from Kyabje Ling Rinpoche during this time. The ordination happened during Kyabje Ling Rinpoche's teachings on Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. Also helping in the ordination was Kyabje Serkong Tsenchab Rinpoche, the chant leader. At the Bodh Gaya monastery, at that time, also attended, acting as the preceptor revealing the secret. That person takes you outside and asks you 20 questions. If you have or have had any diseases, and so on. You have to consider this person to be your teacher, and I did. I saw Gonsar Rinpoche in Bodh Gaya, and he said to me, "When you take ordination, at that time you are very pure, so it is important to do as much virtue as you can while your vows are so pure." The Bodh Gaya teachings. The Lamas always attended the Dalai Lama's Bodh Gaya teachings, but this was Zina's first visit. Anne and James traveled together, arriving at 3 in the morning. Bodh Gaya was packed tight with Tibetans, but a Thai monk they met on the train invited them to stay at his temple. They were welcomed and given comfortable bunk beds. Monks and nuns always sleep in their long undershirts, and it simply never occurred to Anne, who was tall and very wiry, that they didn't realize she was a woman. The Lamas were staying at the Tibetan temple. Next morning, Anne and James hurried over there. "Lama," said Anne, "they think I'm a monk. What am I going to do?" "Listen," said Lama, "in the eyes of the Buddha, there is no male and female, so it doesn't make any difference at all. Bodh Gaya is full, and there's no place to stay, so just be quiet and don't speak." They returned to the Thai temple, but the following day some friends gave them a big room in the Dak bungalow. Lama Yeshe and Zopa Rinpoche moved in there as well. In the room next door was an aristocratic woman from Darjeeling, who had her servants prepare wonderful meals for them all. Zina stayed at the best address in Bodh Gaya, the tourist bungalow, which had bathrooms. Baba Ram Das was paying for her room. He was in town attending a 10-day Vipassana meditation course with the Burmese Indian master S. N. Goenka, a layman and the most prominent student of the great master U Ba Khin, who taught in English. His Vipassana courses consistently attracted many Westerners interested in learning meditation. The Lamas took their students to hear Kyabje Trijang Rinpoche, who was unwell and taught while lying down. Next, they all received an initiation of the highest Yoga Tantra deity, Yamantaka. This was followed by a 3-week teaching in Tibetan from Kyabje Ling Rinpoche. The Westerners did not understand a word because there was no translation. Sylvia White was getting bored. Zopa Rinpoche warned her not to swing her long zen or upper robe about so much, because the spirits are all around, and you can knock them over when you do that. I can see it, and they don't like it, he said. Oh, sure, if they're made of air, what does it matter if a little more air goes through them? She shot back. All through Ling Rinpoche's incomprehensible teachings, it became more and more apparent to Zina that Zopa Rinpoche needed to teach a course in English. Lama Yeshe always claimed his own English was not good enough, and only Zopa Rinpoche could deliver such a course. Thinking of Goenka's success, Zina suggested a 10-day course, but Rinpoche insisted 10 days wasn't nearly enough time to teach anything, and the whole idea was ridiculous. Consequently, he wasn't interested. Bodh Gaya was a social hub for the Tibetans. Lama Yeshe ran around meeting all sorts of old friends. At one such reunion, he got into a debate and swung his mala so energetically it broke, showering the crowd with beads. About 20 old friends from Sera were staying at the Tibetan monastery, among them Jampa Gyatso, who had become a full-fledged Larampa Geshe. Lama asked him if he was interested in teaching Westerners. Not now, replied Geshe Jampa Gyatso, but I might consider it in the future. Old friends teased Thubten Yeshe about mixing with Westerners, saying his main practice now appeared to be making money from ingis. One day, Lama and Zopa Rinpoche produced bread and butter, tomatoes and such, and started making sandwiches for themselves. None of the Tibetans had ever seen raw food prepared this way before. What are you doing? They asked. Why won't you spend money on food now you are rich? The Inji students, eager for teachings in English, were happy to hear Lama Yeshe had agreed to hold a question-and-answer session at the Tibetan temple. Among those attending were Alex Berzin and his childhood friend, John Landau, Americans from New Jersey who were in Bodh Gaya attending teachings. Alex was one of the very few Westerners who had studied the Tibetan language before coming to India. During the previous year, he had lived in Dalhousie, studying with Geshe Nawang Darje. John had just arrived on his first visit to India and planned to go to Dalhousie to join his friend in studying with Geshe Darje once the winter had passed. As for Geshe Darje himself, he would soon be appointed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama to become the principal teacher at the new Library of Tibetan Works and Archives in Dharamsala. John was immediately overcome by his first sight of Lama Yeshe. As soon as he walked into the room, smiling that wonderful smile, I experienced something I had never felt before, John happily recalled. It was as if iron filings filled my heart, and Lama was a powerful electromagnet that brought them to life, causing them to churn about and rearrange themselves. He was different from anyone I had ever met before, and I liked him immediately. Although he appeared to be someone who had transcended the ordinary, he wasn't at all otherworldly. Instead, he was very human, and I felt I could trust him completely. To say his English was poor would be generous. It was very broken, as he himself said, but I had never met anyone who could communicate so wonderfully. When he spoke about developing a warm peeling, I did not understand his words at first. However, I soon realized he was talking about the warm feeling growing within me at that very moment. Besides being so warm and clear, Lama was also very humorous. This endeared him to me immediately. A young Zen monk, Zango, was teaching in English at the Burmese Vihar, and Zopa Rinpoche attended one of his guided meditations for Westerners. The way I heard it, he made no distinction between sleep and meditation, Rinpoche later commented. His explanation of meditation was like some dark sleep, where there is unconsciousness, with no awareness of any object. Zango told his students, "Stop thinking, this is Dharmakaya." Obviously, Rinpoche didn't think this was so. Even though the monks in Tibetan monasteries study and think about the path all day long, they don't call that meditation, he added. Zango had a Canadian student, Mark Shainman, who attended Lama Yeshe's talk. I had my foot propped up on a statue when he came in, and he told me to remove it and sit up straight. Then he said, "Some people hear the Dharma, and it doesn't mean very much. Others hear it, and like a skyrocket, they go very high. I thought maybe I should follow this guy. I found him with Lama Zopa at the Tibetan temple and asked if I could be their disciple. Lama Zopa laughed hysterically, but Lama Yeshe invited me to Kopan. Once there, he asked me to come to him for private lessons once a week. The first thing he taught me was the 9-round breathing meditation. In my second lesson, he said I should meditate on my penis long enough to make it move." Kopan, Zango, and buying land. Back at Kopan, Anne McNeil was now known as Anila Anne, to indicate she was now ordained. She felt very much at home in her new robes. Sylvia White, on the other hand, hardly ever wore hers. "Lama Yeshe said he wasn't cross with me as long as I still showed respect," said Sylvia. "But I was terribly sexual, and really, robes just weren't for me. I soon disrobed, and a few months later left for Los Angeles." "Los Angeles," said Lama Yeshe, when I told him. "That's the capital of samsara. There is no place more illusionary than Los Angeles." Max wore her robes all the time. She continued to provide for the Lama's needs, and Lama Yeshe now spent about half the week at her Rana house, one room of which she had decorated as a shrine room for her statues. "At least they're not in the fireplace anymore," Zopa Rinpoche commented. When Lama Yeshe gave Max an initiation into the female Buddha known as Tara, Rinpoche presented her with a green Tara Tonka he had painted in honor of the occasion. When Lama finished reading the initiation text in Tibetan, something quite incredible happened. He gave a loud clap. Said Max, "I had this huge vase of flowers on a round table in the corner, with lilies and all sorts of things. When Lama clapped, that vase of flowers burst into flames. They were on fire in that big vase of water. I swear it. I should have taken a photograph. Then he gave me my first mala. He said he got it from Nawang Samten, Rinpoche's sister. I just couldn't believe any of it, but figured he had to be making miracles constantly, otherwise Kopan would have ended in disaster several times already. So these burning flowers were just something else too incredible to think about. I was stupid, too. I didn't know what power was. None of us knew what we were doing." While in Bodh Gaya, Zena had found Zango very interesting and invited him to teach a 10-day course at Kopan. He was a very young monk with a strict, tough style and tended to quote popular Zen koans such as, "If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him." Zango's party line was, "If the guru says black is white, then black is white." On the other hand, Lama Yeshe took the opposite line. "You should think about things. You should check up. Don't just believe. Check up." Zango was Zena's guest, but Lama did not want the students to be swept off their feet. Enlightenment was not going to happen overnight, he told them. There was work to be done. Lama Yeshe's thoughts about the spiritual teacher. Question: what is your definition of a guru? Lama Yeshe's answer: a guru is a person who can really show you the true nature of your mind and who knows the perfect remedies for your psychological problems. Someone who doesn't know his own mind can never know others' minds and therefore cannot be a guru. Such a person can never solve other people's problems. You have to be extremely careful before taking someone on as a guru. There are many imposters around. Westerners are sometimes too trusting. Someone comes along, "I'm a lama, I'm a yogi, I can give you knowledge." And earnest young Westerners think, "I'm sure he can teach me something. I'm going to follow him." This can really get you into trouble. I've heard of many cases of people being taken in by charlatans. Westerners tend to believe too easily. Eastern people are much more skeptical. Take your time. Relax. Check up. Question: why do we need a teacher? Lama Yeshe: why do you need an English teacher? For communication. It's the same thing with enlightenment. Enlightenment is also communication. Even for mundane activities like shopping, we need to learn the language so that we can communicate with the shopkeepers. If we need teachers for that, of course we need someone to guide us along a path that deals with so many unknowns, like past and future lives, and deep levels of consciousness. These are entirely new experiences. You don't know where you're going or what's happening. You need someone to make sure you're on the right track and not hallucinating. Question: how can we recognize the right teacher? Lama Yeshe: you can recognize your teacher through using your own wisdom and not just following someone blindly. Investigate potential teachers as much as you possibly can. Is this the right teacher for me or not? Check deeply before you follow any teacher's advice. In Tibetan, we have an admonition not to take a teacher like a dog seizes a piece of meat. If you give a hungry dog a piece of meat, he'll just gobble it up without hesitation. It is crucial that you examine possible spiritual leaders, teachers, gurus, or whatever you call them, very, very carefully before accepting their guidance. Remember what I said before about misconceptions and polluted doctrines being more dangerous than drugs? If you follow the misconceptions of a false spiritual guide, it can have a disastrous effect on you and cause you to waste not only this life, but many others as well. Instead of helping you, it can bring you great harm. Please, be very wise in choosing your spiritual teacher. Zango conducted very precise walking meditation classes and insisted everyone work at pulling weeds in the garden between classes. By this time, using funds that had been donated by a group of students, Lama Yeshe had managed to buy a block of land right on top of the hill. His students suggested that instead of pulling weeds, it might be more useful if they started digging foundations. Lama Yeshe instructed them to start digging right at the boundary line. He wasn't going to waste 1 inch of land. Lama bought as much land as he could at Kopan. The very first piece had been some steeply terraced rice paddies on the back side of the hill. Next came the plot on top, the first land on which they could actually build. In the delicate business of negotiating the purchase of farmland, Lama Yeshe found the perfect go-between in an elderly Nepalese man, a devout Hindu who lived with his wife in a mud hut at the foot of the hill. They owned 1 cow. Everyone called him Chowkidar, the Nepali word for caretaker, which Lama pronounced Chokidara. Chowkidar became Lama Yeshe's lifelong friend. Oa Delbanco produced some drawings to show how the new building might look when completed. Jampa Trinley donated bricks from a building he had demolished in Kathmandu. These were piled up at the bottom of the hill, and it fell to Anila Ann to hire Nepalese coolies to carry them up and stack them. A barbed wire fence was built around the bricks to protect them. In Nepal, given the right circumstances, anything of value could disappear in a flash. The first Kopan meditation course. Zina was still eager for Lama Yeshe to teach a course, but he refused. She turned to Zopa Rinpoche. She pestered me relentlessly, Rinpoche recalled. She kept on asking until I began to feel encouraged in my heart and developed a strong wish to do it. I asked Lama Yeshe what he thought. He replied, "Well, if you think it will be beneficial, then you do." So, with Lama's blessing, I agreed. The first course was held in April 1971. It was springtime at Kopan, dry and breezy. The monsoon rains weren't due to start until the end of May or early June, but the colder winter months had passed and the temperature was quite warm during the days. Zina took charge of the overall arrangements, and Zopa Rinpoche taught a 10-day course based on his stamp-filled text on thought transformation. With help from Anila Ann, he managed to translate 6 lines on hell, 2 lines on the perfect human rebirth, and 1 line on karma. These were developed into an extensive meditation on how to regard friends, enemies, and strangers with equanimity, and an explanation of the sufferings of animals and hungry ghosts. In those days, practically the only English-language Lamrim book was Herbert Gunther's translation of Gampopa's Jewel Ornament of Liberation, which was first published in 1959. I taught mainly about the lower realms, the sufferings of hell beings and animals, ending up with the sufferings of human beings, said Rinpoche. In order to realize the 3 lower realms, we must fully see the sufferings that exist there. However, at the moment we have no power to perceive these things directly. Therefore, we should try to experience those realms through our practice, using the examples shown in the teachings. In this way, we can gain the power to see this suffering clearly in our minds. Even at this moment, most beings are suffering in the 3 lower realms, especially in the hell realms. Their suffering has not been created by God or fixed by some other being. It is only a creation of those suffering beings' minds. Just as in a dream we may sometimes suffer in a fire, or from all kinds of fearful persons or demons fighting and frightening us. In the same way that these fearful dreams and visions are the creation of our elusive mind, so are the suffering and the realms of the Naraks and so forth the creation of beings' ignorant minds. However, the Narak realms are not the same as dreams, but are karmic creations of the ignorant mind. This is similar to the way that one place can be seen differently by 2 different people. One may see a clean place, while another person may see a dirty place. Although the object is the same, the view varies according to the level of mind, fortune, and the karma the being has created. Although the object is the same, the view varies according to the level of mind, fortune, and the karma the being has created. As the mind reaches higher levels, the enjoyments and the visions change, and the transcendental awareness and happiness we experience increases more and more. Each living being's samsara is a creation of that mind. Each living being's enlightenment is also a mental creation. In a dim room, lit by a small candle with a flickering flame, a person without acute perception may see a fearful moving animal or demon, become afraid, and perhaps throw something at it. This problem is only the creation of that person's mind. The person with a calm, relaxed mind, on the other hand, will see what is actually there clearly. All experiences are created by the mind. Similarly, the suffering of the hell being is merely the creation of that suffering being's mind. Therefore, the choice to experience suffering, to be in a suffering realm, or to be in the perfect peace of enlightenment depends upon the decision of the mind. Around a dozen people took that course. Zango's students from Bodh Gaya, as well as Oa, Zena, and Claudio Kipulo. Claudio had been down in Bodh Gaya when he found himself staring fixedly at a photo of Lama Yeshe. I decided he was calling me. That course was like an explanation of my whole life, said Claudio. Losang Nima acted as umze and took care of the candles, water bowls, incense, and food offerings arranged on the altars. He also supervised all the cooking. During the course, Lama Yeshe stayed down at Max's house. 2 days before the end of the course, Lama Yeshe, in the company of a Lhasa Apso, returned to Kopan and gave a couple of talks. This wonderful little dog, which actually belonged to Rinpoche, a gift from his mother, accompanied Lama nearly everywhere and was much admired by everyone at Kopan. Many strays found their way to Kopan and devoured any food they were offered, but this little dog always sat back very nobly and waited. She never fought over food or tried to get at it until everyone else had finished. Then she'd eat alone, quietly. Her name was Drolma, which is Tibetan for Tara, the female Buddha of enlightened, skillful activity. Anna La'an did not attend the course. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do it or not. When I asked Lama Zopa, he was silent for about 15 minutes, then said it would be worthwhile. So I started it, but one day Lama Yeshe came up from Max's house, called me out and said, "Anne, you're going to leave the course. Walk up to La Wudo with some people and spend the summer there. Lama Zopa will fly up in a few days' time, but there is no room in the plane for you." He said he and Max were going to India. I suddenly felt very unsure about everything. He held out his arm, golden, luminous, and precious, and offered me his hand. I took it very gently, and he said, "Don't worry. Go to my room tonight, and on my bed you'll find my cloak. Wrap it around you, and sit on my bed and meditate. Tomorrow you can leave for Lawudo." After supper that night, I went straight to Lama's room at Max's. It was actually the sunroom and had a wonderful view overlooking the Buddha Stupa, or the Bauda Stupa. I snuggled under his thick cloak, feeling a bit lost, a little cast aside. I knew Lama Zopa would take care of me at Lawudo, but just the same, I wasn't feeling very secure. As for meditation, the best I could do was visualize Lama Yeshe sitting in front of me. Then his mouth opened, as if he was about to speak, but it kept opening wider and wider, until I was looking through it into this incredible vastness of a moonless night full of stars. It was like looking into the universe. His mouth and face melted away, and there was just this vast emptiness. Suddenly I felt the shock of it, and the vision stopped immediately. It was years before I realized that during those first few months, Lama had actually given me all the teachings he had to give, but in a very subtle way. Zopa Rinpoche's return to Lawudo that year and his previous visit in May 1970 marked the beginning of his fulfilling the commitment made by the previous Lawudo Lama, to establish some form of school for the local Sherpa children. Mark Shainman ordained. A few weeks after the course, Max took Lama Yeshe to Dharamsala to attend teachings by Geshe Rabten. Mark Shainman also went and met Max for the first time, because she avoided Kopan. Zena once complained to Lama Yeshe that he seemed to love Max more than her, said Mark. He pounced on that right away, saying, "Listen, I love all sentient beings equally. There is no loving one more than another." With Lama's support, I decided to become a monk. Lama organized all the details of my ordination, Mark continued. During the ceremony, I had to repeat the refuge prayer 3 times. The first time I said it, Lama Yeshe snickered. The second time, he giggled, and the third time he just howled with laughter. Here I was, trying to be very serious at my big ordination, and my guru is crying with laughter. All the other monks there cracked up too. I couldn't work it out. Lama finally explained that what I'd said in my weird Tibetan accent was, "I take refuge in yogurt." When Lama and Max left for Delhi, I went into retreat. I was a monk and had a new name, Jampa Zangpo. Max provided for Mark's robes and 6 months' accommodation for him with a Tibetan family. Massimo Corona. When Lama Yeshe returned to Kopan, he continued to teach twice a week and take care of Zopa Rinpoche. Like a mother, he made sure Rinpoche was warm, ate enough, and kept clean. Tibetans and Sherpas didn't have much interest in washing, but Lama Yeshe did. Rinpoche meditated and studied throughout the night. He seemed oblivious to anything else unless someone stepped on an ant or some other tiny creature, whereupon he immediately offered up prayers not only for the ant, but also for the person who had so unthinkingly extinguished a life. He happily shared his room with mice, allowing them to eat the altar offerings and make nests. Piero and Claudio's friend, Massimo Corona, began attending Lama Yeshe's classes. As soon as Lama started talking, I felt it was all about me, about my mind, my problems, my hopes, faults, and dreams. I thought, "My God, this is my teacher," said Massimo. He went back down to Kathmandu and told his American girlfriend, Carol Cheney, all about it. A few days later, he asked to have an interview with Lama Yeshe. Massimo Corona, in quotes. They brought me into Lama's little room, which was very plain and empty, and introduced me as a friend of Piero's. "Ho, Piero," said Lama, and laughed for 5 minutes. Then he said, "You want to take teaching?" I said I did. "Well, remember, this is not a path for curiosity. This is a path for permanence." A few days later, I went back to ask him a personal question, but Zena, the boss, wouldn't let me see him. That woman was too much. I eventually got past her and asked him my all-important question, which was, Lama, you say we must always be watching our mind, but who is doing the watching? He took one offering bowl of water and poured it into an empty glass. Then he took another bowl of water and poured that into the glass too. Then he said, now there are 2 waters. Can you tell the difference? I got such a flash of insight I couldn't think of anything to say. Practically every word Lama Yeshe said had an incredible impact on me. Zina's daughter, Rhea, was still living with her grandmother in Kathmandu, and Lama often went to see her. I lived in Bauda, and sometimes we took the minibus together. On our way there one day, Lama sighed and said, rich people, so much suffering. He was always moving between Max's house and Kopan, while Rinpoche stayed mainly at Kopan. Once, when I met Lama near the tea shop on the road, I was shocked to see him pick up a stone and threaten to hurl it at a pack of dogs barking at us. These dogs can be very dangerous, dear, he said. It didn't bother him what I thought. In class one Sunday, he said sex was dirty. Zina cornered him afterward and told him he shouldn't say that. Oh yes, he said. The following week the talk was all about sex being dirty and ugly unless it was done with the compassionate bodhicitta attitude. The hippie view of the time, that free sex was essentially liberating, didn't wash with Lama Yeshe. Were animals liberated by free sex? The act, he said, was only transformed by an altruistic mind in which one's primary concern is for the happiness of others rather than the desire to achieve brief physical release oneself. Lama Yeshe on sex and relationships. These days, one of the main reasons that a man and a woman become friends is sexual. They get together for sexual pleasure. In earlier times, marriage had a divine quality. A couple came together out of respect, with the aim of creating a kind of totality. That gave meaning to getting married, and marriages made with such purpose became good ones. Many of today's marriages become disastrous because they lack purpose. There's no worthwhile goal for coming together. A couple should not come together out of grasping at each other. There should be more meaning to it than that. But our craving desire and lack of wisdom work together to create an extreme situation that finishes up causing conflict. The woman agitates her man. The man agitates his woman. In either case, it ends in goodbye. These days, I travel the entire world, and many young people come to see me to discuss their relationship problems, but they all boil down to people's coming together out of the wrong motivation. Whether you're a man or a woman, it's important that there's not too much grasping in your relationship, that you don't agitate your partner. Extreme grasping at sexual pleasure is a problem. Sexual pleasure is an irritant. You can see. However, many couples aren't together for the sex. Their relationship is deeper than that, so their attitude is different. They are very comfortable, free somehow, with no tremendous expectations of each other. Therefore, they have a good relationship. I'm sure you've seen examples of such couples, where there's not much grasping. In my limited experience of the Western world, many Christians who believe in God have very respectful marriages. They believe in something deeper than themselves and are not living for sense pleasure alone. I would say that such couples have been blessed by God or Jesus. Carol was 8 months pregnant when Massimo decided to visit the 16th Gyalwa Karmapa, head of the Kagyu lineage, at his seat in Sikkim. Lama Yeshe warmly bid him farewell. Gurus were like designer labels, said Massimo. All the smart people had Kagyu gurus. No one seemed to have heard of Geshe Rabten, Lama Yeshe, or Lama Zopa. Gelug was not in quotes. The Karmapa told me to go back to Kathmandu and contact some Kagyu teachers there. Lama Yeshe actually offered to come and translate for me. I began to see that maybe my guru was right under my nose. When our daughter, Maitri Dolma, was born in Baudhanath on December 21st, I brought her straight to Lama Yeshe for a blessing, with a gift of the best Darjeeling tea I could find. Chris Kolb. Oa had made Kopan his home. Lisa Latte, an old friend from Denmark, came to visit him in May with her American boyfriend, Chris Kolb. While there, they decided to attend Lama's classes. Lisa and I were on our way to Mount Kailash, where I intended to have a Hindu trident put through my tongue, Chris recounted. I wanted the power such an initiation could give. In those days, I wore shrouds that had been rescued from funeral pyres. All I really owned was a passport, a chillum, and a big lump of hash. Smoking hash was my daily ritual. Psychedelics a monthly Eucharist. I thought selling the best quality hash for the cheapest price the most noble of all professions. To get myself in the mood for that first Sunday class, I smoked 2 joints of my very best hash. I sat in this big room, my back against the wall, waiting for something to happen. 3 nuns stood nearby, clucking at me with disapproval. But I was reverent in my way. Then someone said I should stand up because the Lama was coming. The door burst open, banged against the wall, and Lama Yeshe swept in, radiating health and strength, and with a freshly shaved head. He sat on a cushion and began to meditate. Now I had come across a lot of meditators in my time, but none were in the same class as this monk. He was different. He said things like, "How things appear is not necessarily how they are, ultimately." He obviously had very few English words, but I considered myself a good judge, and I was immediately hooked. Then he said, "At Kopan, I see hippies on the hill. When the sun goes down, they all go, 'Ooh, beautiful.' That is not necessarily Lama's point of view, because beautiful is momentary. Beautiful is actually ugly because it creates attachment," he told us. That made so much sense to me. I could see him watching me out of the corner of his eye. I knew something was happening between us. After the talk, Max left immediately, taking Lama with her. It was clear she and Zena didn't hang around together. Zena was very regal, the hostess. Lama Yeshe never lost patience with her. He was always kind. I liked her too. She was eccentric, and you couldn't be too eccentric for me. Lama had started giving her certain initiations she was very secretive about. I found out she couldn't type. After swearing me to secrecy, she got me to type up her practices for her. She was doing the 21 Taras practice, but none of it made any sense to me. I didn't have a clue. I had never even heard of the 4 Noble Truths, but I did make surreptitious copies of her notes. At an interview with Lama Yeshe, Chris continued, he taught me a breathing meditation and gave me a mantra I was supposed to say as much as possible. Soon after that, I left to go walking in the Himalayas for a while. Building the Lawudo Gompa. At the start of the autumn trekking season in 1971, Lama Zopa Rinpoche returned to Lawudo to begin work on the school for Sherpa children. Max gave him enough money to buy materials and pay workers to clear the rocky road, cut stone, fell trees, and dig foundations. This was Lama Zopa's first experience of handling money, which he kept in a small plastic suitcase. Somehow, whenever the funds had just about run out, fresh donations magically appeared. The work went on while Rinpoche spent hours doing various pujas for the many small insects squashed to death in the construction. Losang Nima repeatedly flew up to Lukla with building supplies, which then had to be laboriously carried by porters up to Lawudo. Lama Zopa also sent Losang Nima and 2 local Sherpas around the villages to take down the names of boys aged 6 and older who were likely to attend the new school. The plan was that during the winter months, the school would operate out of Kopan. Parents were asked to supply their son's first set of robes and a monthly contribution in money or goods. Zopa Rinpoche stayed in Lawudo for 2 months, supervising the construction, paying the workers, and studying the texts that had been collected by his predecessor, the Lawudo Lama. He returned to Kopan, leaving Losang Nima in charge and Anna La'an still in retreat at Lawudo. Many Sherpa families wanted their sons to receive a monastic education, so the lamas asked Kyabje Trijong Rinpoche to send them a qualified lama who could teach them. Geshe Tubten Tashi, a strong-minded and nationalistic Kampa, whom the lamas had known at Buksa, was given the job. He spent a year at Lawudo, thus ensuring the children would know at least one teacher when they came down to Kopan in the winter. Lama Yeshe's heart condition. Anne returned to Kopan in September to find Lama Yeshe very unwell. She took him to the emergency department at the Shanta Bawan Hospital, where doctors confirmed their earlier diagnosis, that Lama had an extremely serious heart condition. The doctors told them that in just a year or two, Lama's breathing would become difficult, and he would grow weaker and weaker. Naturally, this freaked us all out, said Anne. Lama Yeshe, on the other hand, made light of it, which didn't help matters much. For instance, when we wished him good night and said, "See you in the morning," he'd reply, "Yes, well, if I'm not dead tomorrow." Oh God, we all thought. Here we are, starting to build a Gompa at Kopan, and he's going to be dead in 2 years. Many years later, Zopa Rinpoche related that Lama Yeshe had told him the doctors in Kathmandu had actually given him just 1 year to live. Poor Lama, soon he'll die, Lama Yeshe said to Oa. But you'll get a good rebirth, Oa replied. In her quiet way, Max was still paying for everything, but Lama was also looking after Max. I was in a taxi with him in Kathmandu one day when Lama mentioned he had to take a present to someone, said Anila Ann. It turned out to be the wife of an architect Max had been fooling around with before she met the Lamas. Lama seemed to spend a lot of time cleaning up after people. Still, more people began enrolling in Lama Yeshe's Sunday classes. Among them was Geoffrey Miller, the American who later became known as Lama Surya Das. He had been in the audience almost a year earlier when Lama Yeshe had given his very first public talk at the International Yoga Conference in Delhi in December 1970. Whenever I had a chat with Lama Yeshe, Surya Das recalled, he'd exclaim, "You too much, boy." When I asked him what he thought about masturbation, he gave me the same reply, "You too much, boy." He acted as if he'd never heard of it. To most of my questions, he'd say, "Let's look into that together." I liked that together. Surya Das continued, "Sometimes it seemed his main purpose in life was to ensure Lama Zopa ate enough food and got some sleep. I went to the classes and helped Lama Yeshe with his English. Then I went to the hot springs at Tatopani and took 2 trips of purple mescaline. When I told him about my experiences with it, he said again, 'You too much, boy.' His view of hallucinogens was that meditation could take you there, and even further. Lama Yeshe on drugs. Question. It seems that to achieve the desired result from meditation, you need a certain kind of environment. What are the implications of this fact for those of us who live in a concrete, noisy, 9-to-5 world with little or no contact with others interested in the spiritual path? Do you believe that psychedelics like LSD can be important or useful for people like this? Lama Yeshe. Well, it's hard to say. I've never taken anything like that. But Buddhist teachings do talk about how material substances affect the human nervous system and the relationship between the nervous system and the mind. We study this kind of thing in Buddhist philosophy. From what I've learned, I would say that taking drugs goes against what Buddhism recommends. However, my own point of view is that people who are completely preoccupied with the sense world, with no idea of the possibilities of mental development, can possibly benefit from the drug experience. How? If people whose reality is limited to the meat and bone of this human body have this experience, perhaps they'll think, "Wow, I thought this physical world was all there is, but now I can see that it's possible for my mind to develop beyond the constraints of my flesh and blood body." In some cases, the drug experience can open up a person's mind to the possibility of mental development. But once you've had that experience, it's wrong to keep taking hallucinogens because the drug experience is not real understanding. It's not a proper realization. The mind is still limited because matter itself is so limited. It's up and down, up and down. Also, if you take too many drugs, you can damage your brain. So that's just my personal point of view. Lisa Lottie was 6 months pregnant when Lama Yeshe suggested she and Chris get married, adding that it would be auspicious to take precepts prior to the ceremony. He gave me a trial run, said Chris. First he asked me, "You like to kill things?" That was an easy one. Then, with a twinkle in his eye, he asked, "But what if someone is coming to Nepal with a big bomb to kill everybody, and the only way to stop him is to kill? You would kill him then, wouldn't you? It is your responsibility?" I told him, in that case, I was going to have to kill President Nixon right now. "No," said Lama, "because if you kill him, who is going to do his job?" Then he asked, "You like to get intoxicated?" I said, "Sure, I do. I smoke dope all the time, and I'm going to keep right on smoking dope." "Do you become unconscious?" he said. I asked what he meant. He replied, "Does it make you unaware of karma?" I said it didn't. "Okay, then we'll do the precepts," he said. This is what Lama Yeshe told Chris, but at different times Lama Yeshe gave people different advice about using intoxicants. There is really no such thing as an official Tibetan Buddhist wedding ceremony. Nevertheless, on January 3rd, Lama Yeshe greeted Lisa and Chris at Kopan with flowers, incense, and candles, and blessed them. They gave him a hanging mobile they had made out of shells and driftwood. He promptly went into Lama Zopa's room to show him this gift, leaving the young couple outside to listen to their gales of laughter. But when Lama Yeshe came out again, they saw he was crying. He did not explain why.